How's everything? My name is Ray Bonilla. I am guest hosting the Artist Spotlight today, and I am extremely excited to introduce my guest, Renato Muccillo. Um,
Hey,
Renato, thanks so much for coming on.
hey,
I
my
thought I'd
pleasure.
before I'd I guess talk about how should I do this actually? So Renato, I mean, you for those of you who don't know, he's a fine artist. And on the screen that we're sharing right here is just an example of his just beautiful work that we're going to go through today, as well as some of his influences um and anything else. Yeah, so I figured that today we just chat about your work, kind of, how you came about uh, uh, becoming a fine artist, and your influences, and your education, and things like that. And then I know that you have a solo show coming up uh, uh, at Arcadia Gallery
I do.
and in New York, and you were super generous enough to share some of that work, some of the work that's coming in. So we're gonna get a special sneak preview of this work, man, and it is. I mean, I peaked. I peaked. I have to say, I peaked.
Oh,
But
I'm
just
glad.
for the
Yeah.
show.
I'm happy you like it. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's get started with just sort of the basic kind of bio. So you're originally, well, you're from Canada, but from Vancouver, if I'm not correct, right?
I was born and bred, yeah, here on the West Coast and in Vancouver. And my parents immigrated here in the 50s. And I was kind of the last of the bunch to be born. I was kind of the happy accident. And as my mom would tell me. And yeah, I've spent pretty much my whole life here. So
Oh wow. So and they immigrated from Italy, if I'm
from
correct, right?
Italy. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Old
What
school.
what part of it Italy, if you don't mind me asking?
They're from an area, Campobasso, which the town that they live in, Chiauch, is kind of, if you can imagine where Rome is, it's kind of directly across, a little further south, but in the mountainous regions of that area on the eastern side. Very like medieval 11th century kind of town. Not a large population, not a whole lot of anything really up there.
Right.
It's just
Right.
kind of a lot of stone buildings and a lot of beauty, So
Yeah. Yeah. And so did your parents when they came to Vancouver, what did they did they like have a job like in Italy that transferred over to Vancouver? Or was it just more so just finding an opportunity or
they just found opportunity. My dad, my mom was, she was a stay-at-home mom, and she raised us and took care of the household, which is probably the hardest job of them all,
yeah.
especially with me as a kid in the house. But my dad, he was a laborer most of his life, and he got an opportunity to to work on a job site that wasn't too far from our home, which was the building of a church. It was called Corpus Christi, and they were building it in the 50s. And he just basically walked up and said, "Hey, I'll pick up a shovel and I'll do my thing if I can," in his broken English. I mean, you gotta appreciate how daring something like that is. Immigrating to
Wow.
a company, not or to a country, and not having language to begin with, and then being offered a job, and then eventually becoming a cement mason. And but I mean, the ironic thing was that my father was buried in the church he built, right? So
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. I mean,
Wow.
standing on the floors that he finished, it was um, it was deeply moving the day that we
Wow.
had to bury him. So yeah,
Wow. Unbelievable. So
yeah,
so as a stonemason. Wow. So
yeah.
did you I mean, you had when did the sort of art become a I mean, from your previous interviews, and from what I've read, I mean, you started your interest in art started pretty early on, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was lucky enough. I mean, art in our family, um, our I guess our bloodlines. possess a lot of creative people in it. You know, it's interesting, musicians and craftspeople and leathersmiths and all these kind of things. And but it was art was never really kind of instilled or part of our family dynamic, right?
Hmm.
Um, you grew up and you got a job or a trade, and you basically went off and earned your living, kind of thing. So
Right.
um, but I was lucky enough that my sister, who is older than me by almost 10 years now, she worked at an art store up the street. And she used to, I mean, I always had this propensity to paint and draw, like from like probably 3 or 4 years old. I think my mom still has some of my drawings from back then. And so my sister used to, bring home art supplies for us or for me, and kind of got me all fired up creatively, and now I had some tools, um, and literally started selling my work in the art store that she worked at by the age of 10.
Wow.
I was driven. I was a crazy kid. I was so much energy, so much creative energy. So
But I mean, I mean, the excitement of, I mean, I myself got started because my dad would bring home like office supplies.
yeah,
Uh, and, but to be able to be, I remember when I first got my first art set when I was like around 10, but to be surrounded by that, like the way your sister was bringing in home art supplies, I mean, that
yeah.
was, I would have gone nuts.
Yeah,
And it's just,
yeah,
just,
I was a happy kid, right? I mean, I didn't get a lot
yeah.
of it, but it was enough. It was enough that it definitely got me started. And funny because one of my relatives, one of my godfather, or one of the godfathers in the family, and I say that religiously, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, right. The
I'm not asking any more questions. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
no more questions.
Yeah.
Anyways, our kumbada, right? We call him kumbada.
Mhm.
He used to make shoes and special orthopedics for people with specific needs. And remember, he brought this roll of canvas for me, right? This huge roll of canvas, and it was like, you need stuff to paint on, so here you go. And I used to stretch it on sheets of cardboard, right?
Whoa.
I mean, I was 8 years old stretching canvas. I mean, on cardboard, but still learning, learning these crafts at a very, very young age. And but I was very lucky. I mean, I was always surrounded by people. They didn't necessarily say, "Hey, we want you to be an artist for a living," but they most certainly helped me along as a kid to do what I really love to do. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, that's awesome. That it's like you didn't have necessarily like a direct, like, hey, this person, this family member was an artist, but you had like tangential kind of like things that were related.
yeah, oh,
I think there's,
absolutely,
especially when you read, like, I remember I had a student one time, it was, I think, one of the best students I've ever had in terms of just acumen, being able to understand artistic concepts. And it was just this like color theory class in a small community college that I had taught. And most of the students there had no art experience, and neither did this student. And she was incredible. And I remember asking, like, did you come from a family of artists? Because like you're just able to absorb this at such a high rate. I'm having problems keeping up with you. And she's like, no. And I was like, what does your mom do? It's like, oh, she stays home and she works here and there. And I said, what does your father do? He's like, oh, he's an upholster. And I was like, oh. He's like, yeah, he's always working with his hands, and so I
yeah,
usually help him out with things. And I think the what that teaches you, though, that type of trade, whether it's like that stonemasonry or like making shoes, like the idea of
yeah,
being able to focus on something for a long
yeah.
time and run it through a process. I mean, I don't think there are a lot of things in life that kind of equate to that, if that makes sense.
In this day and age, no. I mean, it's one of those things where, I mean, you have to have kind of this predisposition for that sort of learning, right? And some kids are just so gifted at early ages to understand and kind of dissect these ideas, and even getting younger now, right? I mean, we live in this world of information, and I mean, anything you want to learn, you can learn. I mean, I can't even imagine, when I was, you know, 10 years old or 12 years old, whatever, having the ability to just search something, right, for this
Right.
kind of immediate answer to your question. And so it was, you're lucky. It's great to see kids who have just got this, this special kind of gift for artistic learning and understanding, right? Just dissecting, like you were saying, dissecting um, ideas and basic, information that most people just, find incredibly difficult to kind of take apart and understand.
Yeah. And I think that's the huge thing, is the access to it is
Yeah.
just light years, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
how are you finding, how were you being exposed to the arts, I guess? Was it through that art store?
Yeah, it was very interesting. I mean, there used to be this artist down the street from us who had this little, storefront. He was an Italian gentleman. Our neighborhood that I grew up in used to be, there used to be a large Italian community in it, and not so much anymore. But I remember he had this little shop, and he'd paint these, the classic painting that you'd find in literally every Italian dining room, right? It was this over the top, kind of uh, uh, Bob Ross ish kind of, landscape. And I remember walking by there one day when I was going up to the art store and seeing him working away. And um, I mean, as soon as I got my hooks into absorbing information as far as process as painting, I mean, I used to literally sneak up to the window, and I mean, I must have driven him crazy, because I just I'd be like just standing there on my tippy toes looking through the windows watching him. And I eventually kind of, weaseled my way into the store and sat down on the floor, and he let me watch for a little while. And then I think I just kind of got under
Wow.
his skin and started asking way too many questions. And you know, and it would be like I'd come there and he'd just stop painting, right? And I kind of got the drift pretty quick. And but that was kind of the beginning of it all. And
Wow.
just this need to understand and be creative that way, right?
Right.
Learn the ropes, right? So
Yeah. And so, whether, like, from there, I mean, what other artists like started to come into play in your sort of sphere of influence? I mean, how'd you
oh
go about
goodness,
discovering those?
yeah, it was there, like I said, there wasn't a whole lot. There wasn't a whole lot as far as influence for years and years. And again, it wasn't part of the family dynamic. It wasn't. Um, it just wasn't something that I had an opportunity to see or be part of. And so I kind of, went it alone for the better part of probably 5 or 6 years, until I was old enough to get myself to a store and, pick up, an edition of Frank Frazetta's book, right? His
Wow.
sci-fi illustration book, and Boris Vallejo. And
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
started to kind of really change how I looked at painting, right? And it was especially Boris's work. I mean, it was just so beautiful and refined, right? And where it excelled in technical kind of prowess, it didn't have the energy of like Frank Frazetta's work, right? Like Frank's
Right.
work was just like, right? It was just
Yeah.
so much energy. And then I kind of started leaning in towards that sort of, those sorts of themes as a teenager, right? Just having fun
Yeah.
and doing that sort of thing. And but yeah, those were kind of like the early ones, right? And
That's awesome.
I think I kept my Frazetta books till about, I don't know, probably about 10 years ago. And then I ended up handing them off to a friend of mine overseas, because she just loved those sorts of things. So I was like, hey, I got a whole bunch. You want them, right? Just mail them to you. So, and that's what I did, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I mean, little did
yeah,
you know that it's like the time to get into him, right?
oh
And
yeah,
the time to get into him, and of
yeah,
course Vallejo, and like those artists, like, were just, it was like an explosion of
yeah,
of that type of work. That's been a similar tale from a lot of painters that I've ran across. Just
yeah,
Rosetta just coming into that sphere, because he was the most accessible. When you think about it,
yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I got into, I mean, I was born in the 80s, so I got into art because of comic books.
Yeah.
And but outside of that, there was nothing. I grew up in a just an ordinary middle class family, and I mean, art wasn't really a thing. And there was,
Yeah.
I had like a distant cousin that was like a painter, but like that I never saw. So like it's amazing what your first what's your first art that you are exposed to, how important that is, because like if you didn't have that painter, in your town, you know, who knows where that influence would have gone. I mean, you would have been
Would have come from.
like,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, where would it come from?
I mean, every one of these pieces, they all kind of fit into the larger scheme, the big puzzle, right? The big picture. And it's very interesting. You randomly stumble across these things through your life, and you don't realize how important and influential they'll be throughout your whole life. You know, and I often I just kind of thank the art gods, right? Say, hey man, like thanks for putting this in front of me to see it right when you did. And
Yeah,
because who knows, where I would have ended up, even the trajectory of my life would have, right? Who knows, right? Hard to
right,
say.
right.
Hard to say.
Yeah. And so, did you ever have aspirations of being an illustrator after like seeing Frazetta's work and Vallejo's
you
work, or did
know
you not kind of connect it to when you had first seen it?
Yeah, it's funny, one of those things, I don't know if it's the same for every artist or, for you, but I mean, my, I mean, I've always been known my whole entire life as the artist, right? In elementary school, I mean, I was really lucky. I had really great third grade teacher, Miss Rosemary Mack. If she ever gets to hear this, thank you for everything you did for me. She was just this kind woman who just really, really kind of encouraged me to be creative in class. And um, and it was just always one of those things where I always knew that I was going to be an artist. This was it. Right. And I mean, the ongoing joke is everybody's like, hey, why did you choose to become an artist? I'm like, because I sucked at everything else. Right. And,
Right.
but the reality is that, you know, it was just art. Art was on the top of the pile of my interests. I don't think I suck at anything else. I just think I excel in art. Right. And,
Right.
as a painter and a creator. But yeah, it was just always something I just knew. It was, now I've had plenty of jobs my whole entire life, and was able to kind of step away from, being caught up in that rat race in the very early 2000s, and deciding that this was it, time to time
Time to
to
go
make
for
the
it.
time to make the
Yeah.
decision. I was getting close to 40 then, and it was like, okay, well, you better you better do it, because if you don't, you're not going to have this chance again, right? So
So you went to college. Did you go to college or
I'm embarrassed to actually say this, but I literally didn't even make it through high school. It was one of my biggest regrets in life, and it was kind of one of those things. I showed up, I showed up for the party, but I didn't really do much while I was there. And I was just a kid that just didn't, yeah, I didn't learn very easily. And
yeah,
or learning for me was a little bit difficult. Reading was a challenge for me, and not that I can't read, I can read perfectly, but if it wasn't something that interests me, I just didn't want to, I just didn't want to read
right.
it. I was just so distracted. And, um, and I blame art for that.
Yeah.
It's all art's fault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I
And,
mean, I think sometimes, I mean, I taught at universities for 13 years up until recently, and I just remember seeing students that just, I mean, even on like that level, that just weren't ready, and
yeah,
or they're, the system wasn't set up to work with those types of students, and
Yeah.
which was a shame. Like they would, and I think in high school it's even more of like uh, you get that really large swing. It's like if you're not in the right system, of education that's able to sort of cater to like how you learn,
Yeah.
then it becomes more of a thing that you rebel against in a sense, because that's what you are. You're rebelling against this authority that's saying like
Yeah.
you must do this way, and in reality your brain doesn't work like that. And you get viewed as a rebel when in fact that it's like you said, like it's like I could read perfectly fine,
Yeah.
and you're a
Yeah.
really intelligent person, it's just a matter of just fitting inside that
The
sort of
teaching
system.
curriculums. Yeah. I mean, it's or teaching methods. I mean, I wouldn't say that I had a learning disability or any of those things. It was just what I was being taught or how it was being presented to me just didn't sink in. And I
Right.
think when you're a creative kid, I think when you're a right-sided thinker, you're it's just you see the world just differently, right? You just do, um, and it was pretty evident from early on. I mean, I was a hyper kid, and it's just so much boundless energy, and always
Yeah.
the class clown, right? It's just it's what I did to communicate, right? and
Right. Right.
and draw, right? That's what I did.
Right.
So
Right. So from like basic, so are you just like completely self-taught then, in
I'm
terms of what did you?
completely self-taught. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, look at
It's
that.
and this is a conversation I have with a lot of kind of aspiring young artists. It's they're like, what classes can I take or can you teach? And it's all these things. It's like, what? Um, my biggest or my biggest piece of advice to anybody would be, just seriously sit down in front of an easel or whatever workstation you have and paint. This is where all of your answers will be, or all of your questions creatively or technically will be answered, right? Sure. I mean, you can go online and if you want to learn about product, research it, right? But as far as painting, yeah, it's like just do, right? Do. And I mean, I believe I'm a perfect example of that because I mean, it was just, I painted for, literally decades before anything real happened for me, but every time I picked up the brush, it was just, there was something new being learned, right? Even if
Right.
it sucked really bad,
Yeah.
I learned something. And, it's ultimately it is the biggest thing that anybody can do for themselves, you know? And,
Yeah.
it's just, you will learn. I mean, it's just like plein air painting, right? And it's something that I don't do enough of. And you will learn more in one day of plein air painting than you will a year in a studio, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that is very true. And it goes the same way with training yourself as an artist. It's just like you can sit and talk about it, you can sit and read about it, but you will learn more in one day by simply mixing paint, putting it on, a surface,
Right. Right.
right?
And so
So
you basically just trained up yourself, just looking and painting and
yeah.
reevaluating and constantly. So from Frazetta to Vallejo, then who was the next sort of artist that came into
Oh goodness.
vision?
I mean, it was a long time. I mean, I think the next to kind of start filling come across my line of sight was probably Robert Bateman, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
Robert
Of
Bateman.
course. Yeah.
Robert
I've got some
Bateman.
of his images right here.
Yeah, yeah. Bob Bateman was he. You know, Back in the day. I mean, I kind of jumped into the deep end probably it was very early 90s. I kind of worked jobs here and there, and I was, painting and just, all kinds of subject. I was doing a lot of airbrushing at the time too, right? Doing a lot of illustrating. I kind of stumbled across a friend of mine, um, Mark Heine, and Mark is a Vancouver artist and one of the best airbrush artists I'd ever met. Like, it's just, the guy was just unbelievable. And I remember walking into an airbrush shop down in Vancouver and seeing one of his illustrations on the wall and just being absolutely blown away, right? Because I mean, I'd gone from this you know, kind of oil painting background, where it has its limitations, right? I mean, you can only control oils so much, unless you're a technician, right? And then suddenly seeing Mark's work and going, wow, this is just mind blowing, right? It was just so graphic and just so tight, and rendered so beautifully. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to get into this because it just fascinated me. So I picked up I picked up a bunch of airbrush equipment, and then at the same time, I was kind of watching what was happening, with Robert Bateman and, in the whole wildlife scene. It was, for me, it was just a way of capitalizing and making a living, right? It was kind of like, I wonder if, doing these sorts of subject matters would work, right? And if I'm capable of doing it, it's like, okay, well, I think I'm skilled enough as a painter and an illustrator to be able to do this, but I implemented a lot of airbrushed sort of techniques and kind of started at that, and it actually really worked well for me. I published probably 6 or 7 of my prints, or my paintings, into prints, and that kind of led me on to the next stage of my kind of creative career, right?
So you were looking at, I mean, were you looking at magazines at the time and
Yeah,
just
I mean,
asking
I
questions and
yeah, it was like magazines and stock photo and just everything I could get my hands on. And at the time, again, we didn't have internet, right? We didn't have
right.
computers, period. I mean, people who didn't live, or didn't live in that generation don't understand how much work you had to go through to actually get information, right? If you didn't go to the library, you were dead in the water,
Yeah,
literally,
yeah.
right? Um, and So, but again, my upbringing, I spent a lot of time outdoors with my dad. My dad, in our household, it was all about fishing and hunting. So, that
Okay.
was a great big part of my life, right? And again, implemented sport fishing into my creative endeavors as far as what I was illustrating and that sort of thing as well. But yeah, I had decided that I was going to do. I had done this, I guess, landscape based painting, that it was simply just a branch, right? Just kind of covered in all of this kind of these droplets, right? And it was just kind of like uh, an airbrusher's dream, right? It was kind of like, oh yeah, I can just render each one of these things, and I did that. And I decided that I was going to do a Cibachrome of it, so I did 10 prints of it, right? At the
Oh wow.
time, I was working for the Bank of Montreal here in Canada, and it's kind of my first job out of after leaving high school. And lucky enough, I knew a friend of a friend who hired me at the bank. So I was working at the data center and doing my art on the side. And I ended up doing this Cibachrome print and sold all of them. Right. That was my
Wow.
first taste of it, right? To everybody I worked with. And I think at the time, this was like 1990, something like that,
Yeah.
1989, 1990. And sold all of them. I think it was like $150 a pop. So it was like, wow, I actually made some money here, right? This is not bad. And so I decided that I was going to try my hand at wildlife. And I thought, okay, let's just see what happens here. So I did my first painting, and it was of a horned owl. And I was lucky enough to be able to shoot at a wildlife refuge, birds of prey, and got in there and photographed a bunch of stuff, um, and did this painting. And again, you stumble across the right people at the right time in your life. um, I had a friend of mine who ran a auto body supply shop, Paul Levesseur, and me and Paul have been lifetime friends. And Paul, he his bank manager, I guess, the woman he dealt with at the bank there, her son he was an art print dealer in Toronto, right? So Paul, Paul had seen some of my work. I also did some F1 illustrations and all those sorts of things. And Paul saw them, and
Yeah.
he's like, I'm going to talk to her and see if she can arrange a meeting with her son to maybe help you along, or, give you some advice. So, a few weeks went by. I finished up the painting. I got a call from this woman. Her name is Joyce. And she said, well, my son's coming into town. He's only here for a few days. He's pretty busy, but he said he'd meet you. Right. So fair enough. I tucked my painting away and off I went. And, the first thing he said basically to me was, I'm not really looking for any new artists, but, I'll take a look at what you got. I mean, I was a kid, right? I mean, I was 25 at the time, 26, right? And that's pretty young back then,
Yeah.
to kind of,
Yeah.
go headlong into an art career.
Right.
And so I pulled the
And
painting.
limited edition prints, because that was like the heyday of it.
Yeah,
Especially.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so I pulled the painting out and propped it up on the chair, and him and his mom just kind of went silent. And um, and he just kind of looked at me and said, yeah, I think we can work together. Right. So I quickly learned about publishing, because I wanted to have control of how these things were being printed, and talked to a couple of print houses in Vancouver. Again, very different back then, because you were talking about color separations, photographers going in and warming up presses with thousands of prints, right, to bring color up. And I mean, it was a real job, right? It was a lot of work and expensive. And eventually we ended up printing 500 off that one, and we ended up selling them in like 2 months, right? So
Wow.
yeah, and again, it went on for a few years, and I felt like I was working, because I was doing something that was earning me a living and a career, and putting food on the table. And but it just, it felt like it was a real struggle to kind of try and find subject matter, and the market was really booming at the time. And I guess it was about 1995, 1996, digital printing came into play.
Oh, so it came into play in 96, 95. Because I
Yeah,
know that was like a huge, because that was the problem with limited edition prints. It was so expensive to make, and the
yeah.
process was so intensive that digital
Well,
kind of like erased the pricing in a sense, right? Because it made
well,
it so much
yeah.
easier
But
to produce. Yeah.
what happened was, now you had everybody doing prints. Suddenly the market
Oh,
was just flooded full of stuff, right?
oh, right,
And it was kind
right.
of like, oh man, I don't even want to compete with this. This is just not worth it, And
I never thought about it like that, because
yeah,
like
yeah,
having access to it was limited the amount of people that could do it.
yeah,
Now that it was a little bit more democratized, it just like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just a huge influx of people.
It became, yeah, the market just was just full of stuff. And what I was making per sheet back then, it was kind of like a fraction of what I was making. And I was like, you know what, this is not worth my time, right? It's just
Right.
too much effort for very little return. And I wasn't really happy ultimately with the subject matter I was working on. And so it's I kind of, life threw a couple of curveballs my way. I ended up having a child, and so it was like, okay, it's time to go back to work, right? And
Right. And
so
so were you doing that? You were doing that full time?
I
Um,
was.
okay. So
Yeah,
then you had left the bank
yeah,
to do that, and then
I did.
okay, and
Yeah,
then
I,
went
I
back to
was
work.
like,
Okay.
yeah, I was kind of like, man, I'm making more money doing this on the side than I actually am working for the man, right? And it was just like,
Right, right.
I'm out of here, right? And it went well, but again, I was young, right? And I mean, I say young. I mean, I was tipping into 30, right? And to me, I mean, I look back at that and I think, yeah, that was young. And there's a certain level of immaturity. I can only speak for myself, because kids seem to be a lot more serious these days about things. But back then, I just felt like a wild-eyed kid, right? And just didn't have, I just didn't have the focus and the drive, and just this regimented kind of work ethic to kind of do it successfully,
Yeah.
so
I mean, yeah, that's it's. I mean, I'm about to turn 40 in September, and I could tell you that like 25-year-old me. I mean, I was very serious, but I, there's just not like yeah. I totally see where you're coming from. Just
yeah, I
having
mean,
the
it's
maturity to be like break it down. Just be a completely objective about it. There's still a lot
yeah,
of like like you're start like, kind of blinded by the romance of it in a sense, and
yeah,
that
I
kind of
mean, yeah,
leads you kind of astray in a weird way.
it's a funny thing, right? And you don't realize it until you do get a bit older, right? And it's just
Right,
like, you're full of great intentions, but just very, not the experience that you need, right?
right,
Um,
right.
and that just comes with time. So, but yeah, and then going back to work again. But at that point, that's, when I was doing the wildlife um, subjects, I had been approached by White Rock Gallery, which is here on the coast of BC. And the owner at the time asked me if, because they'd seen the print work and they really liked it. And they were buying a lot of prints at the time too, and asked if I'd be interested in putting some of my originals in the gallery. And I was kind of like, yeah, that sounds like an idea, right? That sounds great. So I did. And, we've had a 30-year relationship ever since, right?
Wow.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
it's
so
been,
you had been with them that early on. I
yeah,
didn't know that.
yeah, right
Wow.
from
So,
right from the get-go. Yeah.
and
Right
so
from the
they took
get-go.
you on. They took you on basically just as a print artist because that's what you
Well,
were
they took me on
predominantly
as one
doing,
of their
or
artists. I was giving them
okay.
originals, and I was kind of
Oh,
breaking.
okay.
Yeah, I was kind of breaking free from the wildlife as well at that time. I was kind of experimenting and doing things. I mean, I was rendering things that were just like, ultra hyper realistic, and which is fun for a little while, but I mean, it can get a bit daunting and a bit boring, right? I mean, it becomes
Yeah.
work pretty quick, and
Right.
there's something about painting, right, as opposed to illustrating. And I say leave illustration to the computers nowadays, right? It's just,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah. You're talking. So for those that so predominantly there's a lot of illustrators watching in this crowd. So what Renato means by like illustrating means it in the way of like not illustration as the practice of illustration, but more so clarifying. Like it's
thank you.
like illustrating like every single little nuanced detail,
That's
like
right.
every hair on the head, and like every pore on the skin, that sort of thing. And I totally see where you're coming
Yeah.
from on that, because it's
Yeah.
like it becomes it's a cool thing to do, because you're like, wow, I can't believe like a hand did that. But at a certain point, at least for me too, like I love that type of work,
Yeah.
but for me it becomes an exercise that
It,
and I just lose a lot of
it's
steam.
daunting. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
daunting.
yeah,
And I respect people who can do it, it's just craziness. I mean, for me, I think I'd lose my mind,
right,
it's
right.
too much for
So
me to handle. So
that it's really great that you were able to uh establish, join that gallery, and kind of grow with them, for
yeah,
all
yeah,
these
yeah.
years. And
It's
so
yeah. She is single-handedly. Denny was single-handedly. I mean, she helped guide me through, you know, the waters of this, and she was just a great person to have on, in my corner as far as being an artist and being a gallery artist, right? Um,
yeah.
I think she saw something quite unique and quite marketable, and it worked so well. And yeah, I mean,
Well, and also to have the patience of just of having that foresight. I mean, like you essentially, there's a gallery in Boston called Sloan Merrill Gallery,
mhm,
and it's run by Ali Ringenberg, and they have people like Carla Russo and just a bunch of other people that I can't come to, Tim Wilson, um and I remember Ali was telling, we were talking about the gallery, like growing as an artist and being a gallery artist, and she said that, you know, it was really important, at least in her mind, that artists have a home gallery, like a
Yeah.
place that they could grow. And it was about the growth, you know, and there are certain galleries that are meant to like their goal is to move paintings, or other galleries have, you know, they fit different, you know, functions, you know, or
Yeah.
different purposes. But the importance of a home gallery is really something that's that she felt that really a painter needed to have, or an
Yeah.
artist in general needed to have, in order to be able to sustain their career for a long period of time.
Absolutely.
um
Absolutely. I mean,
it-
it's really key to find, people who love what you do, right? It's easy to
right,
take on artists if you know that, you're able to, um, you're able to um, profit from them, right? But gallery owner may not necessarily like what you do, but knows that there's a place in their gallery or a client who will buy the work, right?
right,
And they don't necessarily care whether you come or go. It's as long as the work is there.
right.
And with her, it was just, I mean, we established a great friendship over the years. And yeah, and it's just hard to believe that that many decades has passed so quickly, right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
I was lucky. I was really lucky. I really, and
well,
she
you were
allowed me
working
to
too.
to kind of experiment too, right? So I mean,
Right,
I
right.
went I went from this ultra high realist hyper realism in wildlife to you know going into the Vancouver Art Gallery and seeing a Group of Seven exhibition, right? I mean,
Oh, wow.
like totally
Wow.
opposite ends of the spectrum, right? As
Wow.
far
Yeah.
as painting
I got
goes.
some group of seven here.
There you are. I
There you
mean,
go.
it is for all you non-Canadians. This is what it's about right here in
Oh
Canada.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Well, I live in I live in Buffalo, and so
yeah,
we're pretty close to Toronto,
yeah,
and I go to the AGO and to see the group of seven. And I'm a huge Top Thompson fan too, even
yeah.
though technically he wasn't part of the group of seven, but
But
people,
still,
but still it was
yeah.
influenced by, you know, like they're all lump them together, and they're just yeah, yeah.
You
So
really
that's
you
really
really have to appreciate what you see in person, right?
yeah,
It's hard to
yeah,
decipher what you're seeing on a screen because you really don't see um, you really don't see the painting for the painting's sake, right? You see the
yeah,
image, and everybody's like, I'm sure everybody's like, oh, well, whatever. But when you see them and you understand what they represented, right? I mean, a lot of these guys would go out there in their little tweed suits, right, in the middle of Algonquin Park at the turn of the last century, right? Before they actually had cars, right? And they
right,
find
right.
themselves out there
Yeah,
canoeing and
yeah,
painting, right, on the
yeah,
weekends, and then come back into Toronto to be illustrators, right, and
right.
graphic designers. And
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, it changed me. I remember coming out of there and seeing some Lauren Harris's and
Oh yeah.
AJ Cassons, right?
Mhm.
And those are my two faves. Tom Thompson for sure as well. But AJ Casson, was the youngest of the group, and just the nature of his work, right? The nature of his design, and it just, oh yeah, I mean, it just hit home, and I felt like I went from one end of the spectrum right to the other immediately. It
Yeah.
was like, oh man, I need to do some of this because that looks fun, right? It
Wow.
looks like a lot of fun. So
Wow.
yeah, I mean, that was lovely.
That's cool. That's cool though, because
Yeah.
that's like, that's coming across. I remember I felt like that when I came across the work of George Bellows.
Mhm.
You know, for me, I'm from New York City, so like he was like, you know, the Ash campaigners were pretty much like the New York City version of the group of seven. They were
Yeah.
like, these people weren't, you know, they were doing illustration, and then like at night they would go out and just like paint and draw, you know, the changing city, like the excavation of Grand Central Station when it was just a
Yeah.
huge hole, you know, in in the earth,
Wow.
you know,
That's very
and
cool.
come back
Yeah.
and paint it. And but like again, like you were saying, like um just to see the paintings in real life, and to see,
Yeah.
you to really feel the presence of the artist. And it's one of the, I remember seeing, I had the same feeling with the group of seven when I saw them at the AGO, which was like, it was just like, wow, these are, I feel like I'm just like here with them in a
Yeah.
sense. And
Yeah.
And then they had the wall with like all of their studies, and the finishes that they enlarged,
Yeah.
and you could just see how fast they were going, but just how
Yeah.
good their observation was too, and just it's
Yeah, they
pretty cool stuff.
represented the North, in a way that was
Yeah,
just what the North was, and it was rugged and bright, and and yet ruddy, and just it was coarse. And you look at some of their studies, Tom Thompson's especially, right? You're going in there with a single brush stroke of paint, just pure pigment, boom, and putting it down and leaving it,
right,
almost
right.
abstract in nature, right? Just leave it, leave it, leave it, and just let it develop. And yeah, it was just really, it was moving, to say the least, moving.
Yeah. And so did that like change your did you go back to your approach and things like that? I mean,
I
did you
did, yeah. I mean, I
yeah,
literally started painting them way more impressionistically, right? And again, I was very lucky that the gallery was really quite open to allowing that. Um, and kind of, I always kind of felt my roots of classical realism, just kind of poking through, but attempting to develop these pieces of work with more of an impressionist sort of attitude, right? And which I still to this day kind of implement into my practice as a painter. And and it may not seem that way when you look at the paintings on the screen here, but when you get a good look at them close up, I mean, they're very suggestive with brush marks, and
oh
I'm
yeah,
all about
yeah,
about mark making, right? I love
right,
making marks in paint film. I mean,
right,
it's a lot of fun, right? And you can get away with a
right.
lot by doing that, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean these pieces feel, these old pieces, or all your pieces feel very kind of like a like Barbizon school mixed with kind of the naturalist movement in
Yeah.
a sense as well, like where if you look at those pieces, they look really refined from like, when it's like this small
A
thumbnail on the
thumbnail. Yeah.
internet, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when you actually see it, it's like a 40 by 60 painting or something, and you really
Yeah.
see how it's just a field of color, and there's a lot of suggestions of textures and um things like that. And so
Yeah.
you had talked about, you said classical, realism. I mean, were there any painters of sorts that you were also kind of being influenced by while being influenced by
Um,
Tom Thompson,
yeah,
and like,
it
again
kind
on
of,
the
yeah,
side.
it kind of evolved. And again, at that time, still, having the luxury of a computer was, it wasn't there yet. And
Right.
so there was not a whole lot of influence, right? Unless, I ended up going to a gallery or museum. And unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot of museum, or not a whole lot of shows or exhibitions at the Vancouver Art Gallery that really interested me to get me there. And so I just kind of like free fell for, years, just kind of developing my own thing, right? And just kind of mashing out my own path in the creative field.
Yeah.
Um and I guess back again, it would have been probably early 2000s. Things that change the trajectory of what you want, or how you see your career going, and that sort of thing. And um, I'd stumbled across a friend of mine who is a friend of mine now, and by the name of Ross Tenhall. And Ross was he's a local artist. I wouldn't say local, he's globally known. And Ross was doing a show at one of the major galleries in downtown Vancouver, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. But when I was working at the Bank of Montreal, we were close enough that we could walk down there during lunch to go and see the show. And somebody had said, "Hey, there's this major show going on, and you got to see it. You got to see it." So I remember going down there, and I mean, Ross had some serious hype around his show. He was the golden child back then, and I mean, he
Wow.
still is. But back then, he was just kind of breaking out and just being awesome back then. And hard to describe. He's very stylized, but the show, I remember walking into it and hearing kind of the backstory of it, and which was what was just kind of tweaked my interest, because as a guy looking for a way to make a career as an artist, right, you love to hear these stories, because everybody's like, oh man, you don't want to be an artist and you're going to starve, right? And here was Ross, who was a firefighter, working on his off days as a painter. And the show at Bushel and Mullet, that was the gallery. Literally people lined up the night before to get a piece of his work, right? And he would do these kind of, it's hard to describe his work.
What's the last name, if you don't mind me?
Penhall. His earlier work, yeah, it's his earlier work. I mean, he do these kind of street scenes. How would you call them? Street scenes, neighborhood scenes, hedges, and just very stylized and just beautiful and luminous. I remember going into the gallery and seeing these things and just, being moved by the story. Thinking to myself, wow, okay, this is actually attainable, right? Like there's enough of an art culture in this city that people are willing to line up to spend their hard-earned money to buy art, right? So this is actually doable. And I remember sitting back going, you know what? I can do this. I think I can actually do this. And yeah, I think these are his newer work. Those are his studies, little guys. Let's see if something comes up. No, those are his studies. Those are his small studies. His work is quite large. But his neighborhood landscapes, right? He just do these really quiet kind of street scenes in kind of these little neighborhoods of these beautiful hedges that were lit and luminous. And but it was Ross's story that really, yeah, there we go. And I think that's a pencil crayon. I believe that one there.
Wow.
Yeah, but they were very interesting. They're very beautiful, and the originals were just like, oh man, they were just glowing, right? And so anyways, I just it really kind of set me on my way. And I was thinking, okay, well, I actually think if I apply myself hard enough, I can do this. This is what I want in my life, right? And I think I've got the skill set that I can achieve it, and a couple of years go by, and I'm now back to work again, and I'm working for the Law Society of British Columbia, and of all jobs, in the administrative office. And I was just the guy who delivered stuff here and there, and if something needed to be set up, I was the guy that did it. But all at the same time, still painting. I had my little corner of my apartment at the time, and was still painting. And the Law Society had a really nice art collection in their corporate offices upstairs, which I spent a lot of time in. And yeah, so I was lucky. I was able to see some really decent artwork. And Gordon Smith, he was another one. Gordon just passed away. Painted literally to the day he died at 99, and he died a few years ago. But they had a few Gordon Smiths there, and but what they did have was a big blank wall. And me being me, I kind of talked to people in the office and said, listen, how would you feel if I maybe hung one of my paintings up? And they're like, what are your paintings? What do you mean? You're a painter, right? Knowing you. And I was like, well, yeah, right. And I brought in my hard portfolio case with me, and I was like, this is what I do. And they were like, oh yeah, no, that'd be cool. That'd be great. That's your wall, right? Do your thing. So I hung up one of my paintings, which at the time I believe was an East Coast fishing village, just a Newfoundland scene, and that I basically drawn up. I was really kind of attracted to the big, bold colors of the boats and the old shacks and stuff. Yeah. So I did this painting and hung it. And the president of the Law Society at the time, Richard Gibbs, really loved it. He was from the East Coast, and so they approached me when he retired if they could buy the piece to give it to Richard as a gift. So fair enough. I was like, absolutely, of course, and proceeded to hang another painting. And I was smart enough to basically put a little information tag on the, on the paint, basically turned it into my own store, right? Which is pretty gutsy move, right? Because they could have easily just said, "Hey, listen, pal," right? Um,
Right, right.
so, and fortunate enough, every month they would have a meeting of the QCs, the Queen Council, which is basically the governing body of all legal practice in British Columbia. So they would meet. They were all kind of the top lawyers, and they would meet to discuss, what was happening in the province, and issues and that sort of thing. And I was lucky enough, again, to have one of them, Ralston Alexander was his name, approach me and say, "Hey, my wife is friends with a gal over on Vancouver Island who's opening up a new gallery. Would you like me to have her give you a call? Because I'm sure she'd really love to see your work, and maybe we can get you set up." I was like, "Yeah, absolutely, of course." Right. So,
Wow.
went over to the island with my car full of work, and they proceeded to take everything. And by this time, we had kind of established, a fairly decent clientele list at White Rock Gallery. And so, they were doing a lot of advertising, magazine advertising, and that sort of thing. So the word was getting out, the images were getting out, people were recognizing it. And yeah, so she took me on, and we started showing there and selling everything that that was going through the gallery. And between kind of the two galleries, it was kind of like playing catch up all the time, right? It was just,
Wow.
yeah, they'd get them, they'd sell them.
Because you were working full time while then and painting on your off times,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah,
just
and
to support those two galleries. Yeah.
yeah, and it got to the point of where I just really really looked at how I was spending my time, and how just how much longing there was to be creative. And it just, the more you want to do something, the sadder you get with everything else, because if it's taken away
Yeah.
from you, right, where you're limited to, from doing, especially being creative, it makes life, it can make life tough, right? And then you just don't perform well with anything you do. So
Right.
I made the decision that, okay, I'm going to give up this job. And my parents thought I was crazy, because I literally just bought my first home, right? I had a good job. I managed to get a loan and mortgage and all those things, right? And my parents are like, "Are you crazy? Like, you're going to lose this. You're going to lose everything you've worked for." And I could have easily remained at the Law Society, I'm sure, to this day, doing my thing. But yeah, I took the chance to jump into the deep end, and really
Wow.
thankful that I did. So
So so this type of the work that you had sent me here, you were saying that it
yeah,
was some of your older work. Now, was this the type of
yep.
stuff you were doing while you were at the Law Society or
No,
after?
this is probably, this the work that you're looking at right now probably dates back, I'd say, probably no more than 10 years, probably
Okay.
5 for most of them. These are my faves. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's some of the earlier work kind of changed a little bit, or things have kind of evolved since the earlier days. Again, at the time of my decision to kind of leave, I stumbled again into another influence, and that was Gerhard Richter. All right,
Oh, yeah.
right. I saw Gerhard's landscape. I'd only seen them in a book. Right? I'd never actually had a chance to see one in person, and it's kind of on the bucket list. I'd love to see one. And I know he's, I believe, 92 now, and I think his days as an artist are probably coming to an end, right? And
Yeah. Probably
it's
still painting
unfortunate.
every single day though,
I'm sure he's got
Yeah,
that
yeah.
gigantic squeegee doing his thing, right?
Yeah.
But again, it was as much about the art as it was about the attitude of being an artist, right? With him, and very much a thinker, an intellect, and but um, his landscapes were just, I mean, they literally just, they struck a chord. It was one of those
Yeah.
things, those ethereal kind of images were just like, oh,
Yeah.
holy smokes, you can't
A
describe
real
it.
sense of like real sense of space, right? Like when
Yeah,
you're sitting in
yeah,
front of one of those
yeah,
things. I was lucky enough to see a few of them in
yeah,
New York, and it was like you really felt it was
immersive.
360 degrees when you
Yeah,
stared into it. And not many paintings do that.
yeah,
And it's a real, I don't know how to put it into words. I mean, Gerhard Richter would say that's the whole point. It's a visual language, not a verbal one. But like
yeah,
he would, like I chase that, and it's such a elusive thing, but it's like you were saying, it's like a definite, the painting had an attitude and the painting had a feeling.
yeah,
You could tell it was a specific direction and there were
yeah.
choices being made to kind of curate that experience for the viewer.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think what was fascinating too with his work was, and it kind of led me down to the way I look at images and look at landscape and what I choose to paint and that sort of thing was, his work was kind of like almost random, like subject matters, like it was just like an accidental photograph, right? It was kind of
Right.
like, why would he have photographed that? Right? Why would he have photographed it in the first place? I mean, and it was very gutsy to go, I'm going to turn this into a painting, right? And do so. And but it was just something about the quaintness of the ordinary that I found really fascinating. And but it was the way he was painting it that just kind of exuded all of this emotional these components that you normally don't see with a lot of paintings, right? They're renderings of places and things, right? And with him, it was like it could be anything, but what you felt looking at them, right, was really quite
Right.
extraordinary. And that's kind of how the beginning of what I'd started with my landscape, where it started, right? And it was just, yeah, it was definitely a big player in how I approached my own work for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's really interesting because you are coming from you're a painter who looks at other painters and is able to identify kind of the feeling that they're trying to get. And you're taking that and trying to integrate into your own work, and that's what I love about the painters that I love, to able to capture some of that and make another person feel that way or make me feel that way when I'm making it. But it's surprisingly uh not a technical thing,
yeah,
in a sense. It's not like, oh, I like Gerhard Richter because he did these steps. It
yeah,
was more so like, I like Gerhard Richter because this is what he's expressing and this is what he makes me, this is the emotions that he's
yeah,
drawing out of the viewer
yeah,
uh with his paint. And the same thing with Tom Thompson, and I think that that's a really, you know uh, great thing, for you to say. And also, I think important. A lot of a lot of artists that I feel like, I think process has been a thing that has been um, sort of uh, uh, something that rediscovering the past, rediscovering kind of representational painting. There's been a real emphasis put on process because we're just trying to rediscover all the stuff that was lost, to art history.
yeah,
um, but at the same time, it's a lot of times you get to a certain point in the painting and it's like, well, it's not about the strokes that were made on a technical level.
yeah,
It's what they represented. And so, when people look at it's never like a one-to-one sort of thing. I mean, I know there are aesthetics painters that you draw aesthetically from, but conceptually, I think it's like a whole nother level. And I think that speaks to your work. It's not superficial. If that's that,
yeah. I
there's a
mean,
real
I
sense of like
I
respect
like,
for the place,
yeah, I like
that
to
you're
feel
seeing.
that these images come to me honestly, right? I mean, most of the work, almost all of the work, I should say, but 99% of the work, um, you know, I I've experienced. These are
Right.
places I live, right? This is the place I live. This is like, I'm very, very fortunate that this is what I get to see. Mind you, when I do paint them, it's not like I'm taking photographs. And this is what I like to tell people. It's like nothing is based on a photograph. I'm not rendering something that I've photographed, because that's kind of boring and not very fun, right? I'll shoot, 20 or 30 photographs of a place or a thing, and just basically extract the very best of it all to kind of render something that I'm trying to express, and that's the beauty of being an artist, right? And you don't want to lose that. You don't want to give it up to try and be technically proficient or good at copying photographs, because it's lifeless, right? It's
Yeah.
lifeless.
Yeah.
And I just
so you're drawing from, well, this goes into like some process-based stuff, which I think is, again, I just finished saying like, oh, it's great that you're not talking about process, but I think process, is insightful too into understanding kind of the it's like what Vincent Desiderio would call the technical narrative, like that's something that's really important, that what you're saying. So you're these paintings, they start off as you from they originate from your research, right? So this is from multiple photographs that you're taking of places that you've been.
I literally shoot on a daily basis. Like I'll take the dog out, I take the dog out every day, so we go on our 3-mile walk, right? And I will just randomly shoot, not because it interests me, it's just because I know that at some point I'm going to need a photograph of something for a reference, or something that I'm working on, like a little tiny chunk of grass, right? Or just a branch curvature or something, right? So it's kind of like, my phone is so excessive with photographs. It's like, oh my God, like 30,000 plus photographs of just things, right? But those things all lead to the creation of these, right? Of these paintings. And again, it's how I approach it. I just, you just need your database, right? Of information.
Yeah.
Right? And
right, to give you the tools necessary to design the image, because that's what you're really doing. You're not saying I mean, it'd be great if everything was just like that, and you just
God,
like
yeah.
click. You
Life would be so easy, right? Life would be easy, that's just not the way, right? And I mean, this is what makes being an artist fun, right? It's license and and expression and all those good things. But yeah, it's also led to some real headaches, because you're trying to create things that just aren't, right? And and this is where you really kind of test your chops, because a lot of people are like, yeah, not working, off to the side, I'm going to forget about that one. And me being the nature that I am as a human, I am tenacious, and I look at every painting as being a puzzle, right? It's, the answers are there, it's just a matter of figuring it out. And my and words that I always tell myself is that if one man can do it, so can another, right? So if one human can create these things, so can you. It's just a matter of learning what you need to learn and not giving up on it, right? And it's tenacity that basically wins the race, right? So
so are you so is it every painting a its own approach in a sense, or do you approach them when you're building these actual paintings as like differently or the same way?
No, you know what? Every painting seems to have its own little personality of how I approach actually the act of painting. It's like I'll try something different, and then it just kind of leads me down this rabbit hole of needing to kind of learn something, because I've really buggered the painting up, right? And that's like, okay, well, I've got to approach this differently, and I've got to try this differently. And I'm more of a how do I, the terminology for it? I do a lot of subtractive sort of painting, right? Where I'll lay down colors on the first and second sittings that are just pure highlight colors, really saturated, bright colors, and then start working transparent into it, and wiping back little areas, and it just kind of glows through. And and again, mark making, right? And it really creates these really interesting visual effects that look like they've been just painstakingly done, but they haven't been. They're like a swipe of a brush or a rag or whatever, right? And suddenly you get all of these really interesting visual passages happening, and these really interesting edges where paint, where it's at its best in this transparent form, is showing through. So you get these really beautiful glowy edges and that sort of thing. And
Wow.
it's just, that's kind of how I've always painted, right? It's
Yeah. I mean, for me, I would love personally a like to one day, like this is me in my studio, of course, so it sounds like the musings of a mad person, but like I dream in my studio, like, oh, wouldn't it be great just to have like step one, step two, step three, that way I don't have to suffer so much, because like I don't know about you, like in my studio, every, like you were saying, every painting's got its own personality, and like I know like what worked in one painting is not going to work
yeah,
in this one, and the painting kind of, for I like, my one of my teacher, or I don't know if it was like one of my teachers um used to say it, or I read it somewhere, but oh, I think it was, you familiar with Harvey Dunn by any chance?
mm,
um he was an illustrator around like the turn of the century, 20s, 30s, 40s, but he taught a lot of like the great American illustrators of his time, and he used to, there's this collection of class notes, right? It was really bold stuff. Actually, I think you would like him. It's like really gutsy, like type of
yeah,
painting. And he was born in South Dakota, farm kid. I mean, like working on a farm and stuff like that. I'll send you some. But
cool,
um, he said, he said that first people would tell him, his students would complain like, I don't know if I could do this painting. I'm not good enough. And he felt, he always viewed paintings as like things of their own that chose the artist. So it's like, well,
yeah,
if the painting chose you, so of course you could do it. You just have
yeah,
to do it, figure out how to do it. But he would say, like, he would really like emphasize listening to your piece. And like as a, early on in my studies, I would look at that. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, does it make a sound? Like, does it say like
damn
mix
it,
green
talk
with
to me,
yellow?
man.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's more, it's like you were saying, it's uh more like the personality of it, like Scott Christensen. I don't know if you're familiar
Yeah,
with his
yeah,
work. Yeah. So he used to, I saw a talk with him, and he had said like, I'm trying to paint a feeling of a place, not a like a census,
yeah, yeah. No,
of
absolutely, no,
information,
absolutely
right?
agree, absolutely agree.
Yeah. And I love the way that, that totally is the way, at least I look at it too, because it's not important that that blade of grass, or like you were saying, or that tree was there at that time that you
Yeah,
took the piece, but what it is important is that you're getting across what it was like, experiencing that
yeah, no,
memory,
it's the whole experience of seeing it. I mean, this painting in particular that we have up on the screen here, this is a place I've painted this a few different times, and unfortunately, this whole area has been flattened. Right, this
Oh
painting
wow.
was based on preservation more than anything. I mean, ultimately, when I first saw it, I mean, it was just so incredibly beautiful, right? I mean, just so incredibly beautiful to
Yeah.
see, right? That algae is literally as bright as it looks on the screen. I mean, it's just
Wow.
ridiculous. It was just this overload of color and mood and everything else. And I mean, I live in an area that is a floodplain. So turn of the last century, the Dutch came in and basically designed the whole dike system down here. So the Americans tried
they
it,
they
failed. The Canadians
they know
tried
their
it,
way
it failed. They
yeah,
know their way around,
they
yeah,
know their
around
way around
dike
dikes, yeah,
systems, yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, but this was one of these areas that spring release, and during the spring and fall we get these beautiful algae blooms that happen, and I was at the right place, right time, and photographed it. And that's probably photograph from 15 years ago, but sits in my
Wow.
reference material. And it's, I always go back to it because there's just so many juicy little bits and pieces in it, right? um, but yeah, they ended up gutting this whole thing. They put in this, they cut down all the cottonwoods in the back, and they put in this pump station and this automated raking system to take out all of the
Oh,
algae and all of that stuff. And
wow.
it's just
Wow.
tragic. It's tragic.
Wow.
I mean,
Wow.
my first show at Arcadia in 2020, was it 2020, 2021, 2021. It was all based on, these little hidden gems of places that, that were there, not there anymore, right?
Right.
Um, and I included the GPS coordinates to all these places on the back of the painting, so people could actually
Wow.
physically, well, virtually go there, right, and just check
Wow.
them out and see them. So,
Wow. So and this is another one of those
yep,
same area, same
same place.
spots.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is the sanctuary, and again, this is one of these places where if you didn't look twice, you drive by it, literally
Right.
drive by it. I call it the roadside attraction, right? It's just this beautiful berry farm that's on the opposite side of those trees, and this is kind of the outflow from there. And but in the spring and fall, it's just, I mean, literally, it's right out of Monet's garden, for God's sakes, right? But it's literally
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
ditch on the side of the road, right?
Wow.
My key is to try and extract something that's just so visually beautiful from something that is just so randomly boring, right?
Right.
And
Right. Right.
if you were to pass this in the wintertime, it'd just be a ditch, right? With
Right.
bare trees, no,
Right.
no algae, no nothing. It's just this gray ditch. But in the spring, the thing just comes to life. So
Yeah. Oh, it's yeah. Stuff is just absolutely beautiful. I mean, it's and like I was saying before, like just having it has a sense of just space, and
yeah,
presence in it. You don't uh look like, to paraphrase like an old teacher of mine, you don't look like a tourist in your own paintings.
yeah.
And that's awesome,
Thanks, man.
yeah, I mean, it's yeah, you're really almost painting like this. I could almost smell the mossiness,
Yeah, yeah.
it's
It's again,
uh,
I feel really fortunate to be living where I'm living, because when you get this handed to you all day long, it is a crime not to actually sit and paint it
right, right,
seriously,
right,
right?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
almost like the art gods made it easy for me, right?
right,
There
right,
you go.
right,
Just do your
right, here
thing.
you go,
Yeah,
right, right, just do your thing, right, yeah.
yeah, do your thing.
So we're about, let's see, it's 8:48 on my end. So we're getting close to the hour and a half
Yep.
mark, and I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about these beautiful pieces that
Uh,
you previewed for us. And you were so thank you so much again
oh, you're very welcome. Thanks
for
for getting
sharing.
it out
Yeah.
there. Yeah, it's
So this is your new pieces for your upcoming solo show at Arcadia Gallery
Arcadia.
in
Yeah,
New
yeah.
York.
June
And
17th. June
June
17th.
17th. Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, so what did you was there anything different that you brought to this show that
Well,
you felt like
I'm
versus
doing.
like your
I'm
previous
yeah.
event?
I've kind of implemented a drone into my tools. Right?
Yeah,
My
I was
tools.
hoping you
My
were going to
thing.
bring that up. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was lucky enough to be given a drone, and it was just, it literally made my world just open up, right?
Yeah.
We're so accustomed to what landscape looks like normally, right? These
Yeah.
traditional ideas of landscape, and where we sit as viewers, and that sort of thing, right? And I a couple of years ago, we started really suffering quite badly from floods that were happening on the Fraser River and the Fraser Valley. And I mean, literally just, the whole valley, tens of
Wow.
thousands of people were just, washed out of their homes and farms
Oh, wow.
because of it, and of a breach on the dike there. And but I was lucky enough to have have the drone up in the air to photograph some of these areas. I've done a couple of paintings of the Fraser River and that sort of thing, and just these little backwaters that had filled up, and just kind of implementing them, into the work. I just visually was just so kind of fascinated by the looks of these things, and it introduces a whole new way of looking at landscape painting and landscape itself. You're getting this very beautiful kind of bird's eye feel to things, high enough to be to view it from a different perspective, not too high that you feel like you're in a plane looking down at things. But it sure did open up a whole can of worms of technical issues, as far as composing these things, because of all of the perspective challenges, right?
Yeah.
With the pieces that were higher up, it was creating this fisheye kind of feel to things where, you were dealing with a perspective off on the horizon, which is, this classical kind of approach of, the vanishing points. And then suddenly you were getting perspectives that were directly behind you, kind of emanating right into the center of the earth, right? So everything was tunneling down that way, and then you were looking off to either side and having perspectives shooting out that way as well. So you're creating this almost big bowl of, angles. And
Right.
and when you're working specifically from a photograph, you just follow the photograph. But I don't do that. That's my problem, is that I'll look at it and go, I really love the idea, but I don't like the way this river curvature is, or I don't like where these trees are, I don't like that, right? And you start composing these things and you're just like mentally gutted by the time you're done, because it's just like, oh God, okay, why did I do this, right? This is just more work than I'm capable of. But, you sit down and you doodle away on your sketch pad, and suddenly it all starts to kind of work again, right? And you figure it out. And I mean, I'm really excited for this series of pieces. This is just
they look beautiful.
A small example of them. I think there's going to be close to 30 paintings in this show. So
awesome.
It's been 2 years of work, and I'm really excited. The first show was fantastic. We virtually sold the show out, I think, on the first or second day, and which is a huge thing. And unfortunately, of course, I wasn't able to go, right, because we were right in the thick of COVID. So this time I'll be there for sure, and fingers crossed that it gets received as well as the first one. So,
well, yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, I think these are home runs, man.
Thanks. I really appreciate
it. What's your how long did something like this take? I'm just thinking, like, I gotta ask, like, in terms of time, because I'm just it's so well
too damn long, right?
Too. Yeah, I know.
Damn long. I literally,
one thing I was gonna say was, like, isn't it like I've had those pieces where you're like, you have to basically replace most of it with other elements, and you're thinking to yourself, like, no, this is a waste of time, right? And then you're like, okay, you're just, when you're about to just give it up, the piece kind of just like, hey, this is actually really good.
You turn that puzzle piece and it slides on in there.
It just slides, like, okay, there it is.
I can tell you, some of these paintings, if you were to ever do an archaeological dig, you'd find like whole cities under that thing, right? And it's literally changed that many times. But I mean, this painting in particular, and it's not a great photograph, unfortunately. But I mean, it's changed. It probably took a few months to do, right? I mean, hundreds of hours of just back and forth, and trying to do it again in a way where, trying to keep your hand as painterly as possible, right? The application of paint, you want to keep it as loose and keep it visually interesting, as opposed to, sitting there and just knuckling down and being ultra tight, because I still want it to look like a painting when you get up to it, right? And have all of these really interesting suggestions, and as opposed to these, literal, these literal kind of applications, or just literal approach to rendering these things, right?
Well, I mean, like that controlling of information, and like how much is too much, and like I could, I'm just thinking about how I would do it, and it's like it would take so many layers of, because I know I'd overdo it, and then I'd undo it, and it would just need a little bit, and So, but it's really it's just so beautiful because
Nice. Yeah, it's
it
interesting.
gets the sense of it, and you're just controlling that chroma across the whole thing. I mean, that is not easy going from warm to cool like that. Whew.
It was not. I mean, this is, and this again, this is where the beauty of, being an airbrush artist, 3 decades ago, right, comes into play, or 2 decades ago. It's just, you understand, the approach of thin layers of paint and glazes, just a little, I mean, on a different kind of level, right?
Mm.
Um, it all plays into your role and your practice as a painter now, right? All of these little tidbits of information. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, you could definitely tell that it's not a man. The drone shots have just like your stuff always has like a nice uh gesture to the pieces, like a compositional gesture, and even in the clouds, you could see there's, but the drone, it's almost like it's like this, they're gigantic sweeps, because it's so
yeah,
much of the the land that you see now. I mean, that almost brings an entire, not that many people deal with that is, I
yeah,
guess what I'm saying, like, and it's interesting that, I honestly think that this drone's going to change painting, because I messed around with it. I had, that's, I think, how we started really talking was I was
yeah,
like, Renato, like you had said, you had, I think you had something, one of these pieces. And I was like, how did you get the reference for that? And he's like, and you had said like, oh no, I got a drone. And literally the week after, I kid you not, that weekend, that following weekend, I was at my in-laws summer place, and one of their our family friend came over, and he's like, hey Ray, he's a real, like, he's really into tech. He's like, I gotta show you something, and then he pulled out a drone, and it was the same, it was the Maverick, God, what is MJ something, it's the same one that you had, that you told me to, and I
oh
was
yeah, yeah.
like,
The
I
Mavic
was
Mini,
just
the
talking about
Mini
that.
too. Yeah, just
The Mini
literally,
too,
it's
yeah.
literally,
Yeah,
tiny,
yeah, yeah.
tiny,
And
tiny.
we were flying it, and I was like, just having, just looking at the way it changes just everything
Yeah,
visually and how
it,
you
it
experience it,
it opens up the possibility, right, of how you view anything, right?
Right.
It's, I mean, on top of shooting stills, I mean, the quality of the photographs aren't great coming out of the thing.
Hmm.
I mean, you got to spend a lot of money to get some serious quality technology out of these things. But
Yeah,
for
yeah.
me, like I've always leaned towards, I mean, I've got all sorts of camera equipment, and I always kind of go towards the last denominator when it comes to the quality of the photos that I'm looking for, just because, I mean, one of my favorite devices for shooting was my BlackBerry, and this was like back in
Wow.
2005, right? I mean, it was like 1 megapixel or whatever it was. It was terrible, but it collected information in a way that was just very rudimentary, right? No details,
Right.
just basic forms, right? You could really easily kind of compose things way easier without being sidetracked by all the small details of everything, right? Or over
Yeah,
over
yeah.
saturation. The chrome is way up, the light's way up. It's just, this was just a simple piece of equipment, but I've got a whole file of just nothing but BlackBerry photos that I always go back to when I'm kind of struggling with things. It's like, yeah, no, there's just too much going on here. BlackBerry file, let's see what you got,
Yep.
right? I need to simplify this again. So,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I'm really happy
That's
with the
so good
drone. I
too.
mean, it's the video. I mean, the possibility of being a cinematographer, right? Is just, it's
Right.
just so dramatic, right? It's just
Yeah.
amazing what kind of video footage you can actually get out of these things. And again, you're dealing with a much different perspective, and a perspective that is not conventional to traditional kind of, you know,
Yeah.
design,
Yeah.
landscape designs, right? So
Right.
we've
Right.
always been a viewer from the grand's point of view, right? And we've never been elevated looking down, and giving people the ability to see way broader expanses of space. an atmosphere, and
Yeah. Yeah.
so, I
And
want
just
people to walk in and see a piece and just feel like they're going to fall into the thing,
right, right. Yeah.
it's this
That's a
visual
great,
kind of, yeah,
that's such a great aim for it. And I guess but in a great way of almost sort of putting a pin in our discussion, in the sense that, like, it doesn't really matter the technique or the tools that you have. What makes your paintings is what, you
yeah,
as a person coming through, and that experience. And I could see the excitement, but I could also see the connection to the subject matter.
yeah.
Even in the new vantage point, I could still tell that it's like, okay, that's Renato was there,
Well,
and I'm
I'm happy
experiencing
that
this.
it speaks that, it's, I mean,
Yeah.
the landscapes that I paint, I consider them to be really sacred. I really do. And I mean, we live in a time that, things are changing so rapidly, and I'm just hoping that one day, some of these end up in, public collections on walls where young painters are just, people who can look at them and appreciate them for, like, hey, once upon a time, right? This is what our neighborhoods look like, or
Right.
this is what painting back then was, and be able to at least extract something valuable to apply to, their practices as artists, or those sorts of things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so yeah,
Well,
no, I'm hoping that the rest of them, everybody will be seeing them on Instagram over the next 8 weeks before the show. So we're kind of getting buttoned down with all the pieces, and yeah, getting excited. So it's
awesome.
yeah,
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you. I know, spending uh this time with us, because I mean, this is yeah, I know
uh,
you're extremely busy because you're about to ship a
yeah.
solo show. So I mean,
Great. I
yeah.
mean, let me say thanks for being an advocate of my work. I mean, you're always, you're always sharing it, and I hugely, and everybody out there who does the same, right? Thanks, man. I really do appreciate it. It means the world to me, and yeah, I mean, it makes this community a whole lot smaller, right? 20
Yeah.
years ago, 20 years ago, you talk to an artist, and it was, God, it was kind of
Uh,
it was a luxury to be able to speak to another. And
it's like water in
nowadays,
a desert. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and nowadays it's just a great big global community of people who are, helping out. So much
Well,
appreciated.
I thank you for sharing your time and your work. I mean, I've learned a ton looking at it, and I'm sure you're going to get a bunch of new followers and
Hope
people
so.
that are
Yeah,
going to
and
learn a ton to it.
well,
And
thanks, man.
yeah, so best of luck with your show. I'm sure
Thanks, man.
we'll have the links to your Instagram and your website, just so that people can
Fantastic.
follow you. And yeah, thank you so much, Renato. I
Awesome.
really
Let's
appreciate it,
do this
man.
again soon,
Yeah,
man.
right. Yeah, looking forward to it, man.
All right.
Alrighty,
Cheers.
take care.
Have a good night.